everyone. Thanks for joining us today for another academic success webinar. Today we are going to be talking about final exams and how to create a study schedule. I think important topics as we get closer to the start of the exams here in a couple of weeks. I'm Ashley Bray. I'm the Learning Disability and Learning Skills Specialist for the School of Continuing Studies. I have with me my colleague, Annie Balot, who's our Learning Skills Specialist here on main campus.
Hello, everyone.
Before we dive into the content today, just wanted to do a quick couple of reminders and some housekeeping material. If you haven't been able to join us for our past webinars, they are archived on our website at academicsupport.georgetown.edu. If you click on the left-hand side for an academic resources tab, the Academic Success Webinar Series has its own tabs, and you can find all of our webinars linked there to our YouTube page. As another reminder, we will be off next week with the Thanksgiving holiday. So hopefully everyone gets some rest and gets to see some family or friends and enjoys a couple of days off. We will be back the following Wednesday, same time, 5:30, same place, same Zoom link, with a webinar on test-taking strategies. So please make sure you pencil us in for next Wednesday at 5:30 and bring your questions. And so we're going to dive in, but first make sure you're following us on social media. You can find the handles for our Facebook, which is ARC Georgetown, or our Instagram, ARC_Georgetown. There we post just some helpful study tips, reminders, information of what's going on in our office, as well as reminders for all of our webinar links. All right, so to jump into today's content, so final exams, creating a study schedule. And we really wanted to cover this topic because I think creating a study schedule for final exams is one of the foundational pieces to make sure that you're going into the final exam period not too overwhelmed and too stressed. You kind of have a roadmap of what you need to get done. And I think when you have that roadmap, you feel less stressed and you're able to concentrate more on the material and what you're studying. So some reasons to create a final study plan. Are you in the habit of cramming for tests and exams? You shouldn't be, but if you are, creating a schedule can kind of help spread things out so you're not feeling that you only have a 24 or 48-hour period to get everything done. Are you pulling all-nighters throughout the week? Something I think we'll touch on a little later is how important sleep is, not just throughout the semester to make sure you're getting a good 7, 8, 9 hours of sleep, but especially during finals time. That's the time when your brain cements that short-term memory to long-term memory. So making sure that you are getting that sleep so that your brain can process all that information you studied is a critical step to this. Are you feeling overwhelmed thinking about your final to-do list? I know we've heard from a lot of students, and I know we know from our own experiences, this is the time when things start being extremely stressful. You're wrapping up classes, you have final projects and final exams you still have to complete before you even start finals. You guys have extracurricular activities that are wrapping up, internships, jobs, work, family, personal things. And on top of all of that, you have a very rigorous final exam schedule. And so this is the time where I think stress starts to go up and we start becoming more overwhelmed by all of our responsibilities, and being able to kind of sit down, take some time to plan out the next few weeks, I think will be very helpful in combating that. So some things to take into consideration when you're creating your final schedule. Knowing the material that needs to be studied. What's on the exam? I think that's the most basic place that we can start. Studying the same subject throughout the week. How are you breaking up your studying for all your classes? Are there classes that you need to spend a little bit more time on studying? Are there classes that you maybe don't need to study as much for? What does that look like? What are your high and low periods of concentration? I think this is something we've talked a lot about on past webinars. Do you work better in the morning? Do you work better in the afternoon? Do you know that you can't get anything done past 10 o'clock? maybe 11 o'clock is not the time to start studying for an exam. So keeping in mind where those high and low periods of concentration are. The environment that you're studying in. Is it in your dorm? Is it with friends? Is it in a coffee shop where there's a lot of outside noise? Do you study best in the library? That's equally as important to figure out. And studying in time blocks. Again, you shouldn't be spending 9 to 5 every day studying. You need breaks. Breaks are important. So how do you chunk out those time blocks into manageable, flexible pieces? What's your learning style, and what are some tools and strategies that you can implement during your study time to really make sure that you're studying in a way that your brain understands it? And I think when we study in the learning style that works best for us, we're more engaged in the material. And as I mentioned earlier, incorporating those break times, very, very important. We're not suggesting a 4-hour break, but are you incorporating break times that you can step away from the material, come back to it, have some reprieve, maybe get a fresh take on it. So we'll talk a little bit more about that later.
Great, thanks, Ashley. So now we're going to dive into a few examples of study schedules. And before we begin, I just want to give a quick shout out to our 168-hour time management activity that's posted on our website. It's a really good activity that captures your academic hours, so the number of hours you're spending in the classroom, as well as outside of the classroom studying, working on group projects, writing papers, creating flashcards, and studying. So it's a really good way to capture how many hours are actually going towards those academics. On the back side of the handout is a way to capture your hours for routine responsibilities. So this is the amount of hours that you're sleeping each night, the amount of hours that you're hanging out with friends or at social interactions, or if you're a student athlete, the number of meetings and practice times and weightlifting hours that you put in. So really figuring out where is your time going. And the point of the activity is to determine, is there a way to kind of shift hours from a certain activity if you feel like you are not putting in enough hours into your coursework or into your classes for studying. So figuring out, am I spending too much time in Leo's and I'm not actually eating, I'm just hanging out, and can I shift that to working on a group project or making a point to go to my professor or TA's office hours to ask initial kind of questions or concerns of certain materials that you're not as sure of. So something to definitely complete at this time in the semester. Again, and that handout can be found on our website. Okay, so the first thing that we're going to talk through, and we've mentioned this during our webinar on time management, is to really have a concrete schedule updated on a weekly basis. As you can see here, we've created a schedule, and I think a lot of students will look at this and say, this looks like a pretty easy schedule, but we try to make it as realistic as possible. The point of it is to have this updated on a weekly basis so that you can pinpoint the times that you're already committed, the times that you have dedicated to class, to internship, to your part-time job, to meeting with professors during office hours, but also including that personal time as well. So you can see that we've planned out a dinner with friends on Saturday night, as well as going to the Georgetown basketball game on Sunday. So making sure that your calendar is up to date. And past that point, then looking at the chunks in your day and throughout the week when you have dedicated time to study. So you can see Monday 11 to 2, there's a great chunk of time to study. Same on Wednesday. Looks like Tuesday, Thursday, there's some time after class before work. That would be a great time to get things done. So making sure that your Google Calendar or whatever type of organizational tool that you use is up to date so that you can first pinpoint the times when you can actually study and then move forward with making an effective study schedule.
And Annie, one thing I really like about this is it's color-coded.
Yeah.
And you can do that on either a paper calendar or you can actually color-code it if you're using the calendar associated with your Georgetown email address. And one of the things I like to do with color coding is like maybe things that are unmovable, like I have to go to in class. And on my calendar, they're red, but here they're blue. And so being able to, if you're a visual learner, associate those colors with kind of what you have to do next and how flexible your schedule is.
Yep, absolutely. That's a really great point. And I think being flexible is also the thing that we like to talk with students about. So this isn't going to be regimented and something that you have to stick to. If another commitment comes up, it's just being able to be flexible and kind of shift priorities or shift to-do list items maybe to the next day or to another chunk of time that you've dedicated. I also like this layout because on the left-hand side, you can see the priorities for this week that are regular, maybe some special priorities. So it's a way to really capture all the information that's going on the weekly basis. Great. Okay, so this is going to be an example of a final exam prep handout that's also listed on our website. So under academic support, there's going to be a tab listed as academic resources, and then a tab for exam preparation, and this is where you can find this final exam prep handout. We recommend all students do this. This is a great way to capture the information going into final exams so you feel prepared, you feel organized, and you know exactly what's to come in the next few weeks. So the first step when completing this handout is to list each of the courses that you are currently taking and your estimated grade in the course. Okay, this would also be a great time to do a check-in with your professors to determine what is your grade. You know, what grade do you want to receive at the end of the semester, and how much wiggle room do you have in those grades? Really just do kind of a gut check at this point in the semester. Additional information is listing the date, the time, and the test location for all of your final exams. So this is really helpful. I think you'd be surprised at how many students we would say have told us that they might have missed an exam or they might not have known exactly where the location was. So this is really important information to capture before going into final exams.
And I think I can speak from my own experience. I remember I was so stressed out during my first semester in undergrad that I actually went to the wrong classroom during one of my finals. And it's something that's so basic, but I think a lot of times when our stress is heightened, so during those stressful times, it's sometimes the most basic information that we forget. And so doing this seems silly sometimes, but having it written down there is just another kind of reassurance that you're putting in that you're going to show up to the right place. Because when I showed up to the wrong place, it only made things 10 times worse than they already were. So making sure you show up to the right classroom at the right time, really basic, but really important to do.
Yep. Okay, so the next step is going to be looking at the test format of each of your final exams. So is it multiple choice? Is it essay? Is it short answer? So figuring out and determining what the format is for each of the finals. You may not know this information yet, but this is definitely good information or a good handout to keep on hand in class when your professor is going to talk about the final exam. Definitely something to keep handy to write that information down. And then listing the content that's going to be covered on the final. Is it chapters 1 through 5? Is it an entire book that you read? Is it just on lecture notes or handouts? And that's actually going to be listed on content sources. So where is the information coming from? Is it coming from your textbook? Is it PowerPoint slides from your professor? Is it your own notes? So figuring out what information you will need to find in order to study that information. And then creating a final to-do list. So maybe these are any missing assignments that you may have, making flashcards for certain tests, or anything else that kind of remains for that course. Again, just a nice way to organize all that information and not force yourself to keep a mental running list of that information. Okay, and then step 3. So the final step is something that is really super important, and this is something that we'll actually tackle at our next webinar. So looking at test prep strategies, so figuring out the actual ways and strategies that you're going to practice and prepare for your final exams. So is that going to be in study groups? Is it going to be with a partner? Are you going to have to make flashcards on Quizlet or physical flashcards to review those? Are you going to take old exams or old quizzes to practice? So what types of things are you actually going to do or need to do for each test in order to feel fully prepared and be successful? Okay, great. So this is going to be our first example of a study schedule. So looking at, this is about 5 days out. Again, we're saying not necessarily wait just 5 days prior to your final exam, but this is a way to kind of set up your week when you do have an upcoming test. So looking at Sunday, so we've listed, okay, prepare for chapter 1, spending about 2 hours on that. And like Ashley mentioned previously, incorporating breaks. So 2 hours seems like a long time to really just continue to read chapter 1 and review that information. Definitely incorporate breaks throughout that so you retain the information more effectively. And then as you progress, so Monday, then you're actually going to go on to chapter 2. preparing chapter 2 for about 2 hours, and then the act of actually reviewing chapter 1. And this is really important. As you can see, for the days that continue Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, you're preparing a new chapter, but you're still continuously going back to review the previous chapters that were already addressed. And this is a really, really important skill. So we want to continue to build on information. We don't want to look at something on Sunday and then not look at it again until the next week, right?
And one of the things I really like about this, Annie, is I think you can clearly see they start with the earlier material, so stuff that you might have covered at the very beginning of the semester, because the newer information, like chapter 4, might be a little bit more fresh in your mind. So you might need to go back and spend some time just reviewing the basics. And as we know, most classes are set up that they build on top of each other. And so going back and saying, okay, chapter 1, and then adding the chapter 2 in, I think is a great strategy to use.
Yeah, I really like this setup. Again, we're definitely not recommending just start 5 days out, but this is the way to really break down the reading material, and that's something that's super important. And breaking down the amount of material that you're looking at each day. And again, retention increases when you look at material a little bit each day rather than just one day and not look at it again for a week. So something to keep in mind.
Okay, so we're gonna look at a different kind of study strategy plan, and that's the 7-day study plan, and this is actually from Oregon State that we've adapted. And one of the things that I really like about this is, and we'll get into it a little bit more into detail in a minute, but it really consolidates the material that you're covering and the different techniques that you're using. So if you start with day 1, you're just starting to evaluate and organize, right? So as we talked about before, what grade do you need to get in on that test? Should you go back and use our final exam prep sheet? What grade do you want to get in the class? What's being covered, right? How caught up in the course are you? I think this is a really important thing that we sometimes overlook when creating study schedules for finals is sometimes you might have missed a couple of classes because you were out sick. Maybe you're behind in some reading. Things happen, we get that. But making sure that you're caught up before you really dive into that deep study final exam mode is super important. So take that into consideration. And as we've been saying, be honest with yourself about that. What study materials do you have? Do you have notes? Are there PowerPoints? Is it notes from a group project? Whatever it is, make sure you're collecting them and that you're there. What are you missing? Again, did you miss the notes from a class? Can you go and get them from a friend? Will that information kind of be reviewed during a study session? So that's day 1. And then day 2, you can identify the topic areas that you want to cover, and you can kind of use that same strategy that Annie discussed before of starting with some of the earlier chapters and then building up to some of the newer chapters. But what we really like about this is there's recommendations of different study techniques that you can use. So you can mix and match based on what works best for you, what works best with the information, what your learning style is. So on day 2, you're doing some practice tests in a test-like setting. And I don't think we can hit home enough on how important doing practice tests are because it's just that repetition really gets you into that testing mindset. Can you create an outline? Can you reread lecture slides, elaborate and add notes? And are you adding those notes in your own words? Can you summarize things in your own words? Are you studying with a friend? Are you rereading chapters? Are you reading chapter summaries and key terms? Are you visiting office hours? Are you making note cards? So identifying what are those study techniques each day. And as you can see, when we go from day 2 to day 3 to day 4, we drastically change the number of study techniques that we're using. So we're really honing in, consolidating, and focusing in on what we need to know. Day 6, the same, we're only using 3 different study techniques. And then day 7 is the general review and weak areas. This is, I think, really important to note. On that last day before the exam, no new information should be added, right? You should be at a place where you're comfortable with the material and using that day to really just do a general test review. Can you explain it to a friend in your own words? Can you explain key concepts? And maybe going over some areas that you feel are a little more difficult or you need to spend a little bit more time on. And that's what day 7 is used for. Also, making sure you're getting a good night's sleep. Did you, have breakfast before you go and take your final? Do you have a cup of coffee before you go and take your final? But are you getting those 7 to 8 hours of sleep so that you go into the test not exhausted, but you feel mentally and physically awake and ready for the exam?
Great. Okay, so the last study plan that we're going to talk through is our 5-day out study plan. So thinking again, 5 days out, not that you should only be starting 5 days out from an exam, but this is a way to really hone in, like Ashley was saying, on specific content and figuring out how to really retain the information effectively. So 5 days out from an exam should be used for the organization phase. So organizing, reviewing your class notes and text notes carefully. Preparing a list of all the topics that will be on the exam is going to be a really helpful task for you to do. And listing those items or those topics in order of importance so that you can focus your attention accordingly. And this may come from a review session that your professor may hold. And this is information that you really want to note down so that as you do dedicate time to studying and you, again, pinpointed chunks in your day when you can dedicate more time to studying, you're studying items that are more important or going to be very prominent on the exam. So day 4, so 4 days out from the exam should be your review and recall day. So reviewing your notes thoroughly. Reviewing your notes is really, really important. We recommend you actually review your notes after class or as soon after class as possible. This definitely helps kind of pinpoint areas that you might not have been able to finish that sentence or finish that phrase, or you weren't able to capture all of the information, or you're able to note a question or an area of confusion. You can go back and talk with your professor during their office hours. So reviewing notes is really an important thing to do. And then this is going to be able to concentrate on the topics that may be more difficult for you to remember. So as you're reviewing, you're figuring out and parsing out information that definitely makes sense to you and the things that you might need to review a little bit more. And using mnemonic devices or visualization or any type of other strategies to really recall that information. Is flashcards helpful for you? Or drawing diagrams, or coming up with like a silly phrase or jingle. So something about recall and thinking about what ways or what strategies would help you recall that information later on. Okay, so day 3, so 3 days out from the exam is the rewrite phrase. So briefly rewrite all important information. Definitely rewriting the information in your own words is really helpful. So it's not as helpful to just write verbatim what your professor said or what's coming from the textbook. So writing everything that's coming from your own head, rewriting things in your own words is definitely going to stick with you more later on. And reviewing those notes repeatedly, okay? So rewriting things in your own words and reviewing that information repeatedly. So day 2, 2 days out from the final exam should be the question phase, making a list of the questions that might be on the exam and answering them in as much detail as possible. So this is where Quizlet really comes in handy. You can create your own self-test using those discussion questions in your textbook, or if there's been discussion questions throughout your lectures, using those as practice problems and figuring out how would you go about answering that question. So really using that time to kind of mimic what could potentially be on the exam. And then day 1, so 1 day out from the final exam is your prepare phase. So this is where you're reviewing your notes and rewritten notes just a few hours before the exam. And just like Ashley said, the day of the exam, there really shouldn't be any new information that you're learning, right? That's just going to get the information that you've already learned. It's just going to make it a little bit weaker. So definitely just reviewing information the day of and not trying to cram in brand new information. And taking time to relax before the exam, just like Ashley said, make sure you're well rested and you had a good breakfast, and maybe you're doing some sort of stress management exercise or activity before the exam to make yourself feel centered going into the exam.
All right, just to wrap up some of what we've covered, some key points. Break the course and exam material into study-ready chunks. So like we talked about, not trying to tackle everything for one exam in one day, do not cram. Break it up into chunks that make sense for you and make sense for the course, and that are very manageable, right? So you're not getting overwhelmed by the material every time you sit down to study. One way you can do this is dividing by date, lecture date or topic. So you review all your notes for 1 week, right? And then stop and go on to maybe another thing, and then come back and review your notes again for the next week. what makes sense. Review the oldest material first. So I think we had some great examples of study schedules that really kind of laid this out, of going back to what you learned at the beginning of the semester that might just require a little bit of a refresh, and then building on top of that. Note what's important. Go to those review sessions, talk with your professors during office hours, talk with your TAs. If someone says this is probably going to be on the exam, then I would circle and highlight it, make sure I'm reviewing that. Is your professor giving you old exams to help review from? Can you go and look at those to get an idea and a feel of what the exam is going to be like and how it's set up? Write specific questions down or pinpoint areas of confusion. I think this is, again, super important. Are you following up with friends in the class? Are you following up with review sessions, emails to your TA, office hours? Making sure that you are not confused before you're going in, because that can just stress you out even more. And again, take time to visit your professor's office hours to address these questions. This might require a little bit of planning. You can't go in necessarily the day before an exam, but finding out where their office hours are as we dwindle down the semester, making sure you're caught up on that material, and making sure, again, you're really getting all that confusion out and really understanding the material before you go into that exam. All right, so we're going to do a couple of Q&A questions. So you guys can ask questions in the chat box, and I think we've gotten a few already, and we'll go over a couple of those questions. And as always, you can come and see us if you have any additional questions.
All right, our first question is, how much studying is too much studying in one day?
So that's a great question. I think it's going to depend on from person to person, right? I think when the point of you might hit a roadblock and you literally just can't read, your eyes are getting sore, you can't read any more of the information on the paper, it might be time to take a break. I definitely don't recommend studying for all 5 of your courses in one day, right? So breaking them up into manageable schedules, taking those breaks. You shouldn't be studying for, sitting down and studying for 8 hours at a time. Can you do 2 hours, 3 hours, and put in a couple 15-minute breaks, and then maybe after 3 or 4 hours, take a longer hour-and-a-half break to go get some food, catch up with friends, and then come back and do another 3-hour set with some 15-minute breaks in there. The general rule is 2 to 1, so for every 1 hour of class time, you should be doing 2 hours of study time. That's a kind of a baseline. Again, it can change by how hard the course is. Maybe you're not as comfortable with the material. So that's also a good, I think, kind of guideline of how much is too much and what you should be studying.
Yeah, I think breaks are really, really important when it comes to studying, especially as you're preparing for final exams and during those study days where you don't necessarily have class and you're just feeling like I have to study all day, every day. It's definitely, we want you to put in the time and the effort, but incorporating breaks and really chunking out your time to make sure you're being effective during that time rather than just rereading material and not necessarily retaining any of that information. Okay, great. The second question is, can I study multiple subjects in one day?
Yes, you can, but definitely, as we talked about, have a break in between. Like, let your brain kind of reset and change gears, right? Because if you're studying something for a psychology class, it's going to be much different than how you're approaching studying for an accounting class, let's say. So that's fine. Maybe you study for psychology in the morning and then accounting later on in the afternoon. But breaking those up, making sure there's a break in between, that you have all your materials prepared in between, that's fine. Just don't go straight from psychology to accounting to another class. That's going to kind of confuse your brain, and so you want to make sure you're parsing that out throughout the day.
Yep, absolutely. And I think what Ashley pinpointed was figuring out the times of day when you're most able to focus. So for me, I could not do math late at night. I was just unfocused, fuzzy-headed, just really not able to retain the information. So I had to make sure that I was studying that in the morning. But of course, then I'd probably be doing one of my ed coursework at the end of the day. So figuring out the time that you're actually most able to focus on material is really helpful to consider. But certainly, we definitely know that you have to be doing a lot of different material a little bit each day, or doing material for some different courses each day. So just figuring out how you can balance that, I think, is important. Okay, the third and last question is, what if my schedule doesn't allow me to study during my high periods of concentration?
Yeah, so that's a great question. As we know, you guys are all really busy, and you're not always going to be able to study between that like 10 a.m. and noon sweet spot that might work. So I think things like when you are studying, can you get as close to those high periods of concentration as well? Is there flexibility in your schedule that you can move things around? Obviously, you can't move around a class to accommodate for studying for another class, but can you study right afterwards? And then things like if you do have to study late at night, which I know is a reality for a lot of our students, is can you take a quick, 15 to 30-minute nap so you feel well rested? Are you studying, in the library and a place that's, an environment that's more suitable to studying than maybe like laying on your bed when it's, midnight and you're trying to read an accounting textbook, right? Because you're more likely to get distracted and fall asleep. So I think putting in some of those supports and really looking at when do you have chunks to fill that in with your schedule.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's important, like we talked about in the time management webinar, is to really be specific with the things that you want to get done during the times that you've dedicated to studying. So not just say study accounting. What am I doing? Am I looking at chapter 1? Am I doing some homework problems? Am I making flashcards? So that actually will direct your studying more efficiently, and when you might not be studying during your optimal period, you still have a good game plan and you still have a good direction for that time that you can dedicate to studying.
Awesome. Well, thank you guys so much for joining us today, and hopefully this was helpful. You can provide us some feedback on our webinar feedback form, and it is tinyurl ARC webinar feedback. You can go there and also make suggestions for future webinars that you guys would like to see. As always, if you have any questions, you can come see us, Annie, here on main campus at Levy 335, excuse me, and you can come see me at the School of Continuing Studies at C144. We have a bunch of handouts and resources that we've mentioned today that are up on our website. If you want a paper copy and want to save some printer ink, you can come get them from the office at Levy, and I have a few down at my office as well. And don't forget to join us not next week, but the following week for our webinar on Wednesday at 5:30 on test-taking strategies. And with that, we hope you guys have a great Thanksgiving holiday.
Thanks.
Bye.